by all the international standards at point of departure. That is much easier, and that, to me, is ethics. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Very happy to be here. I stand here as a resource for all of you, and I'm looking forward to the conversation that will ensue among us, but I hope also with you. I'm really happy to see there are so many young faces in the audience. Thank you for coming. So in those 5 minutes, I really should present to you what resource I am, who I am, and maybe drop 2 questions that I think are missing. I'm very happy that so many other questions have been raised. So I will not touch on many of the issues that I would like to have covered, but bring a couple more onto the table so that we can discuss. I'm a scientist by conviction, and I continue to strive. When I grow up, I want to become a biologist, and I've been trying since I was about 16. The reason why I continue to strive to become a biologist by craft, by learning more and more, is because biology has moved away from me. When I was young, biology was about understanding just what was happening out there. And as you grow up, that childlike interest in nature starts becoming much more of a responsibility, and you start discovering that what you do in biology has incredible consequences for many more and more and more consequences. So the amount of responsibility and the amount of capacity to understand other aspects than just the understanding of the biological system that I'm studying has increased exponentially. So I continue with that. In the process, I've lived in many different countries. I've worked with many different organizations. You might want to know that I have worked for the large transnational pharmaceutical agrochemical corporations. One, Sandoz, before it became Novartis. That I have worked for multilateral organizations, that I have worked as a researcher in many other capacities, including as a researcher with and for indigenous communities, especially in Mexico, in Ecuador, and other Latin American countries. But it doesn't matter where I have lived or worked. What matters is really what the drive is to move to those places. And the drive has been to work on the invisible. Because when you try to become a biologist, you discover that a lot of the understanding has to come from the invisible. And I think that what we're talking about here and what would be necessary to analyze in all these questions is the visibility or invisibility and the responsibility that comes with that making visible. There are 2 questions that I would like to raise. The question of genetic pollution, it bears repeating. Genetic pollution is not like oil pollution. Oil pollution you can photograph from the satellite. Genetic pollution you cannot see. How do we develop the capacity to see that? And how do we develop the maturity and the responsibility to deal with that? And how do we develop the responsibility to put our money and our actions where our understanding is? As we become richer and as we become more influential in the world, that responsibility increases, just as it happened to me in my lifetime. There is another kind of pollution that I want to put on the table as a major issue, and that is the pollution of our intellectual world. The taking over of public institutions that are supposed to help us see the invisible by the influence of corporations. And I really think, I don't want to just bash Norway and bash Monsanto here. I think it is really important to recognize that this is a trend that has to be opposed. Not only because we won't be able to tell when these companies are doing the wrong thing, because we won't even be able to tell where their products are going. And even worse, if what we have in our interest is our self-interest of just increasing the benefits of our capital investments and so on, we won't even have the expertise necessary to do that. I think what we are seeing happening in the Gulf of Mexico today is a direct consequence of the breakdown of the expertise that came from the disinvestment on independent expertise on geology, physics, and oil petrography that happened in the 70s and 80s. And now nobody knows how to deal with this problem. The same thing is happening in biology, but you don't see it. Very few people see it. I believe that we need to take that responsibility, and until we're able to say, yes, I can see that, we should be able at that point to say, yes, I'm making the right decision one way or the other. I don't want to end, again, in a Monsanto bashing or... Sorry, whoever that is. Monsanto bashing or Norway bashing fest. In fact, I have decided to put a good amount of my time. I spend 20% of my year in probably the most beautiful part of your country, in Tromsø, where the only institute that is really independent and has institutional power to do anything scientific about these problems exists in the world, as far as I can tell. The Institute of Gynecology in Tromsø is the place where I work, and I think it epitomizes the dilemma that you guys are confronted with today. On the one hand, you have the capacity to see still. You have not been taken over like the US has been taken over. And on the other hand, your power to influence what's happening out in the world just continues to increase exponentially. I think you stand in a really important crossroads where the wisdom of your culture, the wisdom of your history will serve you well. And I think that you will err on the side of seeing before jumping into what can become a very dangerous enterprise. Thank you.
So thanks very much, Ignacio. Some very interesting thoughts there. So the floor is now open for us to have a discussion. Obviously, a lot of different angles, issues have been raised, from child labor to seed saving to issues of transparency, pollution of the intellectual world, which standards companies should be held accountable for internationally, whether the guidelines are sufficient themselves, and various other issues. Who would like to ask a question or give a comment to any or all of the panelists? Who would like to go first?
Shall we go with you first? I have a question, I suppose, for all the panelists, but principally for Vandana and maybe to Arnold. There was talk about the exclusion option and making GMO the new tobacco. And my question is, can you make the case, and Vandana used the term reductionist, that all GMO use and or the use of patents in agriculture is inherently, and by inherently I mean in any and all contexts, reductionist, and thus at odds with the intentions of solving the world's problems as we see them in the broadest sense? So is there, on these are the grounds I think we'd have to make the exclusion claim, or are there conditions in which GMOs and patents in agriculture could prove productive? Or do you believe they are inherently sort of counter to that? And if so, could you make the theoretical case for that?
Yeah.
I think what Ignacio was directing his remarks to, but in the 5 minutes it was not possible. I think what the independent research is showing very clearly is that the technology of genetic engineering is not science-based. That everything we know about the science of molecular biology is showing other results, which is why you have a gene ecology lab in Tromsø. Because, Terry Travik started out doing genetic engineering and realized the results he was getting was different what